So the ongoing thing that I open with is, do you drink coffee?
Sure.
And usually the person that I'm interviewing now had listened to the previous podcast and they criticized the previous person for their opinion on it.
Okay.
So we've had a kind of a back and forth. One person was like, oh, well, I drink mine black.
Sure.
Because I'm strong or something like that. And then somebody else like, well, put creamer in it because like young people are weak nowadays. Do you drink coffee?
I do drink coffee, as a matter of fact, yes.
And how do you drink it?
I drink it black.
Oh, really? And why do you, is it just because you like it that way or?
Actually, I read something a few years ago that said that the antioxidants in coffee, work best in your body when you drink it black.
Well, now you're bringing science into the picture.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but my wife is one of those people that's a lot of organic foods and things like that. So we drink organic coffee, and I guess she wants me to live a little bit longer.
That's good for her.
Sure, so I'll take it.
I asked you to come on the show because you are in real estate and you buy and sell, help people with that. And how long have you been doing that?
28 years. In fact, 2021 now, so it'll be 29 years about in June.
Wow.
Long time.
That is like almost as old as I am. You've been doing it for a while. Welcome to the Chattervast Podcast.
Thank you.
This is Chris, and he's been my realtor for
5 or 6 years.
Yes, since I moved to Greenville, basically.
That's right. Before you were married, before you had kids.
Yeah, and so I remember I looked you, or well, I didn't look anybody up. I just went on Zillow and found this house, and I was like, I might as well go look at it. I don't remember if you remember the house.
I do. I remember, actually, it wasn't too far from here.
Okay, yep.
And, it was under some high-tension power lines. There were roof issues, foundation issues, and I think it was a foreclosure.
Something weird like that, yes.
So it needed a ton of work, had mold on the walls. Yeah, that one was a little unsafe.
And for your first house, it's not such a good pick, I guess.
No, well, you were brave. You were a brave buyer and always have been because you've got some skills, in renovation and working on houses and stuff like that. So, but yeah, that one might have been too big for anybody to tackle.
Yeah, I remember it being a fairly large house, which actually brings us to like the first question. So I have like a little bit of a direction to go with things.
Sure.
Buying versus renting. That's
Sure.
a huge starting point. I know a lot of people ask, and more often than not, people lean towards buying. But do you see that it's a pretty clear cut, like, well, you should be buying rather than renting, or?
No, absolutely not. In fact, I do find myself quite frequently, we'll say, convincing people that they need to rent. Mm-hmm. And it's really not necessarily just a financial decision. It can be, where are you in your life? What's going on with you? For instance, if you're moving to town, you're uncertain of your job, you may only be here a year. Yeah. Don't buy, because if something happens to that job, or you get promoted or you get transferred and you need to sell, obviously you could incur expenses when you market and sell the house the next time. Mm-hmm. It could be more of a financial burden than a financial blessing. So, if you've got an uncertain financial future or job future, certainly don't buy. Mm-hmm. If you can't afford to buy in the location you want to be in, near your church, near your work, near your family, near where you hang out and do things or recreate, then, rent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I've heard in military families, they tend to have a very hard time because they're moving a lot.
They are.
And some of them don't like to waste all that money because they're just going to be renting indefinitely.
Right.
But do you know of some military people, or I know a few, that will buy houses everywhere they go and accrue them? I'm not sure if that's like a great strategy to...
Well, I work with a lot of ex-military. Well, actually, current military. But, it seems to me that, and I've been very fortunate, and they have been too, that, if they're moving, say, locally here to the Donaldson Center or one of the other bases that's close, then they feel relatively secure. Like, I'm actually working with a pilot now. He's going to be stationed, he's in the Air Force, stationed at the Donaldson Center, and he's purchasing not too far from there, but, he's certain he's going to be staying. Yeah. He's like, I'm very secure. It's going to be like a 5-year posting. I was like, hey, not a problem. You're going to do great.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then that can be a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really good to think through how long you're going to be somewhere, obviously, and where you want to live long term.
Yeah, and the house itself does make some difference. And then what your work schedule is. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, this pilot, he's obviously traveling a lot. Mm-hmm. So he actually ended up buying a new home because he wasn't going to have the upkeep. If you are one of those folks that works incredibly long hours, sometimes renting's better because you don't want to have, say, that one day off a week where you're mowing the lawn, trimming the bushes. It's just, it can ruin your life. I mean, you need to have some downtime. So you really have to kind of look at it that kind of perspective. I mean, a lot of people these days will lean towards purchasing because where interest rates are. And of course, in our area, rents have been just skyrocketing.
Oh, yeah.
So people say, I can save a lot of money, if I buy a home. Well, yeah, if you buy a home, it's in good shape.
Yep.
You don't have to buy a new roof and a new HVAC and all those expensive things.
I don't think people really understand what they take on when they buy a house, because it's not just mowing a lawn. There's things that obviously you can pay people to do,
right?
But that it's a lot of cost to bring on yourself if you aren't ready for it.
It is. And people are so busy these days that, and maybe also they haven't been trained to do things themselves. Like you've done extremely well with real estate, but you do a lot of things yourself. You take on a lot of work. A lot of people, their work schedules either don't allow it, or they don't have the skills, or they just don't have the time.
Yeah.
And that can make it tough. And you know what? That might make you a better renter. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's quite all right. Go ahead and rent, do what's best for you and your financial future, and it'll work out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now if you do go and buy, obviously you would recommend working with an agent.
Well, in many cases, yes. Certainly if you don't have, if somebody's experienced and they bought 5 or 10 homes in their lifetime, hey, look, you've got some savvy. You could possibly negotiate with a for sale by owner, that kind of thing, and do quite well. Agents do have their place. I'm not one of these people that thinks, hey, you've always got to have an agent in every single situation. It can help you. If you've got an experienced agent that knows how to write a contract, knows how to put things into that contract that protect you as the buyer, and of course, as long as the seller is willing to pay the commissions, hey, you're getting that expertise for free.
Oh, well, that's really nice.
Yeah, it is. So it works out pretty well.
So how can you tell if you're going to get a buyer or seller agent, regardless of what side? How do you know how to pick an agent? How do you know if they're good at what they do?
Wow, that's a great question. For me, I think the first thing is you don't want to work with anybody that's trying to sell you something, right? You want to buy a house. So why do you need a salesperson there kind of in the used car salesman vein that's pushing you to buy something? You don't want that. You want somebody to help you buy it, not sell it to you. So first of all, I would say that it'd be, somebody that's willing to work with you, provide you with great information, even if it's something that's, say, negative about that property. You're investing your time to go out with them and look at homes. They need to invest their time to show you as many houses as you want to see until you're comfortable that that's the right decision for you.
I think there's a lot to be said for even the patience of being a buyer, or probably less so on the seller side, but being a buyer, also being patient, because if you find an agent who keeps expanding what you're looking for,
right,
and that you're probably going down the road of like they're just trying to sell you something.
Sure.
So there maybe needs to be some patience on yourself, because obviously you'll always find somebody out there who will find you something to buy.
Sure.
But it may not be necessarily what would be the best in the beginning.
So true. I mean, it's first of all, in our market currently, inventory is extremely low. The COVID thing has not helped. A lot of people aren't putting their homes in the market because they're afraid to have people go through their homes. I understand that to a certain extent. So you have to be careful. A lot of agents will bring their experience with other transactions. That's usually a good thing. But say here, especially in, shall we say, affordable price ranges, houses are selling in hours.
Oh, yeah.
Or 1 or 2 days at the most, especially if it's in good condition. So sometimes an agent thinks, all right, we got to make an offer now. We got to move quickly. We've got to, there's going to be multiple offers. We got to jump on it. And it's easy to get caught up in that. So you want to work with an agent, first of all, that's willing to say, hey, yes, this is probably going to happen, but take a few minutes or a few hours or a few days or sleep on it, do something, think about it, and make sure this is what you want to do. Eventually the right one will come up and something good will happen. So don't get caught up in all the, kind of the auction mentality, the multiple offers and the fast market.
I can't say many people have made good decisions very quickly.
Yeah, it's tough. And you know what? It for an agent that really likes their clients, and wants repeat business, we're kind of as agents, we're in the happiness business. So it's hard to, you don't want to push people into doing something they don't want to do, but you do want to provide them the perspective on what's expected in the market and what could possibly happen. Yeah. So it's tough out there, but we'll see how 2021 goes.
It'll be an interesting year.
It will be. What was it, the old Chinese insult? May you live in interesting times. We're living in interesting times
Yes,
right now.
Very unpredictable.
It is. It is.
So going on with like, if you're going to go buy a house, and then of course, if you're going to sell a house, we can talk about that too. But how do you be a good buyer for your agent? What says, hey, this is, obviously there's the part of the agent that they have responsibility of like doing certain things. And then there's the part of the buyer as well. But how do you be a good buyer when you find a good agent, you want to be a good buyer so that this whole process works out. You find something you want, you find it for the right price. You do the best that you can in that situation.
Well, I think first I would say that to be a good buyer, you need to ask a lot of questions. Okay, and that might sound counterintuitive or not really fit your question, but from my perspective, I think it does. And the reason is as a buyer, if a question pops into your head and you don't ask it, then people start to make assumptions. All right, and a real estate transaction can be very complicated. So, your expectations, say, especially as a first-time home buyer, might not be correct. So ask that question and make your agent explain it, okay, until you understand it, okay? And actually, this might be a way that you figure out your agent doesn't understand. So it gets back to having a good agent, or how do you pick a good agent? But still, ask a lot of questions, because that gets everything out in the open, and you can figure out if it's a good purchase for you, and ultimately that makes you a good buyer. Now, I'd say the second thing is listen to your agent. Okay, now, I'm not saying that means do what your agent says. No. You've got to do what's right for you. You are the buyer. You are the client, okay? It's your purchase, and you're going to have to live there and pay for it. So when I say listen to your agent, ask the question and listen to what they say and how they say it, because they are likely providing you with some information and some expertise that they've gained, hopefully through years worth of experience. And that might affect, impact, influence your ultimate decision. Mm-hmm. So don't necessarily do what they say. Definitely not blindly. You have to do what's right for you. But when you ask them a question, listen to what they say, and then consider it and think about how that might alter the direction of the course that you want to go in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then on the flip side of it, when you go to sell a home, that's a different process, even though we're dealing with real estate.
It is.
What makes you a good seller on that side?
Well, you know what? Clean up is the first. I know that sounds simple. Being a seller is much more about being open-minded. See, if I'm a buyer, I want as much to go my way as possible. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is your chance to be selfish, and it's okay. It's your money. When you're a seller, you need to start thinking about the next owner. Okay, so if you've painted your house, designer colors, reds, yellows, bright colors, or something that somebody might not like, consider painting it, right? Let people come see it. Don't narrow the showing schedule or the timetable that you allow for showings to be so narrow that nobody ever has time to come see it, say, after work or in the afternoon or during baby's nap time or those kind of things. So being a seller is much more about just being reasonable, in what your expectations are of the process and what a buyer would want from you. Because like you said, you're now on the other side of the table.
Yeah. I remember every time we went to sell a house, it was never convenient. Like, because you had to keep your home clean. Like you said, like you need to keep your home clean. You need to be out of the house and make it as available. But I think by doing that, by kind of catering to the buyers whenever they want to come see it and making sure it's all looks good, they gave us the most offers to work with.
Absolutely.
And it paid us in the end.
It does. And you did a couple of things that were just extremely good. And you did them naturally. I never had to tell you to do any of this. But number one, you decluttered. Number two, you fixed small, obvious items that, like, for instance, this is a pet peeve of mine. If I go to a front door and I'm trying to use the key to open the front door and say the front door lock sticks or, it turns the opposite direction of the way it's supposed to go, or, the key gets stuck in the lock. I can't tell you how often that happens. that sets the tone that perhaps the house isn't properly maintained. So it's those little itty bitty things. Now, you guys also, what you did that was amazing is you've got excellent taste in decorations, and the homes are updated and very neutral. Okay, so it doesn't have to be just that right color, but I hate to use this phrase, it's got to be like Bruce Springsteen. Okay, now to me, Bruce Springsteen is a good musician. He's not the greatest musician of all time. Bruce Springsteen was so popular because he appealed to the largest possible audience. So your home needs to be Bruce Springsteen. It needs to appeal to the most people, so it needs to be neutral.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's very difficult if you're a homeowner and you've been there for a while. Of course, you're going to adjust things to your taste.
You do.
But we were in the process of doing this every 2 years.
Sure.
And so we had that idea in mind that, hey, we're not going to be here super long.
Right.
So things did we were like, hey, tone it back, keep it neutral. But now I think at this point we still design, like, even though we plan on being at this house for a long time, like we took a big risk leaving this brick accent in.
Sure, which is beautiful.
And maybe it'll appeal to other people. I'm not sure.
It will. Now, what's funny is you're almost becoming like a realtor. If you go into most realtor houses, like my house is very beige. It's very neutral. My wife and I have lived in 11 houses in the soon to be 26 years we've been married. And so we'll buy them and flip them after we live in them and those kind of things. And very neutral, just because we don't want to have to go through that painting process before we put the house on the market.
Well, I haven't shown you our yellow bathroom yet, so
there you go.
We did take a little risk and went with something because we were like, well, this room will probably be completely gutted and renovated, but we painted it yellow in the time being.
Hey, bathrooms and half baths, if you're going to take a chance with like crazy wallpaper or paint colors, do it in a small area because the buyer will think, hey, it's easy to paint. It's not going to take me forever. And it really does add some, pizzazz to the house. So you did the right thing again.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. One thing I remember, so I used to be an agent, of course, and you know that.
Sure.
And probably I don't know if my listeners know that or not, but there were houses I showed, and it was amazing to see what people did to the ceilings. And I feel like that's the hardest thing. It's just like, why did you paint glittery spirals all over the ceilings on vaulted ceilings?
Yes.
This is going to be impossible to change.
Yes. Well, and that's a big part of it. I call it addition by subtraction. A lot of times I'm showing houses and my clients will go in with wide eyes and, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. But, you don't have to build anything onto this house. You just need to take things out of this house, like the paint colors and the designs on the ceiling, and it'll be worth a lot more money.
Oh, yeah.
But sellers who do that and homeowners that do that do end up costing themselves a ton of money, especially now versus, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Back then, everybody expected to move into a house and replace carpet and change paint and appliances and do things. These days, people want 100% move-in ready.
Yeah.
So when you do those kind of things and you leave them, you're only hurting yourself as a seller.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so now I have like a flip side of being good and finding a good agent, being a good buyer, being a good seller.
Sure.
What about when you're going and you're doing your best to find a good agent, or you're being the best seller or being the good buyer that you can be? How do you know when the other party isn't good? Like you start working with an agent and you're like, how do you tell, like, probably shouldn't work with this agent? Or you go to look at and you start making offers on a house, and how do you know when, hey, this isn't a good seller or this isn't a good buyer?
Gotcha.
And when to walk away, I guess.
Well, you got to go with your gut on a lot of that. Once again, it comes down to listening. With agents, like I mentioned, if somebody's trying to push you in a direction that you don't want to go and you've told them, like one of the oldest tricks in the book for agents is, well, I can't find something in your price range, so I'm going to start sending you listings that are $50,000 more than your budget. I mean, you might be able to afford that, but it's not what you said you wanted to do. So for instance, me, I'm always very careful about that because that's an old trick. Hey, okay, sure, the house is $50,000 more dollars. It's probably going to be a little bit nicer than what we're looking at. And these agents expect their clients or potential clients to latch onto that and end up spending more money than they want to. So, I always try to let a buyer tell me when they want to raise their price range. Hey, I'm not seeing anything in my price range that's what we want. Well, it might not be out there. We've got two options. We can either be patient or we can raise your price range. It's up to you. So certainly in an agent, if they're trying to push you in a direction you don't want to go, if they're not answering your questions with detail, That's a sure sign. If they ignore your questions, okay, if they refer you to somebody else in their office, like, oh, well, I don't know the answer to that, I've got to call so-and-so. Not always a bad thing, but if it's something that, hey, an experienced agent should know, it kind of makes you wonder a little bit.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer and you're worried about, hey, what's the seller doing here? Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. I mean, obviously, if you're working well with your buyer's agent as a buyer, you can ask their opinion. Certainly, hey, what kind of vibes are you getting from the seller or the listing agent? You can also look at a required document in real estate residential sales here in South Carolina, and that's the seller's property disclosure statement. Mm-hmm. And if there isn't a lot of detail on that statement, you should always be a little bit suspicious. Mm-hmm. Because, by law, a seller is supposed to fill out that form, that document with everything that they know about the house that pertains to the sections of that disclosure. And if you're not getting any detail and, oh, no, everything's great. We've had absolutely no problem. We've been here 20 years, not a single issue. Come on. It doesn't usually happen. So then you should start getting a little bit suspicious. Same thing goes the other way. If you're a seller, you're not getting information from the buyer about the process of their loan or the processing of their loan and what stage they're in, their qualifications and things like that. You should be a little suspicious. So it's the little things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think being a seller, looking at the buyer's documents and what they submit and where they're at in that loan process can always be probably the scariest part of it, because sometimes you have multiple offers and you want to take the best one, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go through sometimes.
Well, that's true. And, in the local market with things selling this quickly, I mentioned earlier kind of the auction mentality here where they call it highest and best. Hey, you're selling your house, 5 offers come in. The listing agent says, all right, send us your highest and best offer by 6 p.m. and we'll make a decision. Well, what comes back in on these highest and best offers sometimes can be unrealistic, and the buyer's agent and the buyer might be counting on that. Most offers are contingent upon appraisal. So what happens if you're under contract for 30 days, you're trying to buy a new place yourself, and the buyer's loan falls through because your home didn't appraise because you took something crazy? So sometimes it's better to have an experienced agent that would be probably more willing to say, counter an offer for the buyer that appears to be most qualified, say putting down the most cash. As opposed to just taking the easy way out and going highest and best. And hey, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, that can be quite a risk there.
It can, big and expensive one.
Oh yes, very much. So before we end here, I kind of have like a tips and tricks section. If you have any things, and I'll just throw out a few notes I'd thrown down about staging or finances or flipping, especially like we're in flipping, and I know probably ever since Fixer Upper came out.
Boy.
I kind of like have a love-hate relationship with that show.
I do too.
I like what they do, but then everybody thinks, I'm going to go fix stuff up. And I'm like, well, anybody can make flipping houses look good when you have millions of dollars and a team of people doing it. It looks fun. Yes. But when you're doing it by yourself, I can tell you from experience, and you can say, it's not that easy.
It's not that easy. I would encourage people, if they do decide to flip, make sure you do not just cosmetics, but things that will benefit people for years to come and make the house more structurally sound and safer and all of those kind of things. Because it's not, and of course they try to make it look very glamorous on HGTV and other places, but it's not just all swirling paint and sledgehammers knocking out walls. And we could both probably tell horror stories on houses we've seen and maybe even things we've done ourselves we had to undo.
Every time you go sledgehammer a wall, you got to be putting that sheetrock back up and mudding it, and that's not fun.
That's right. So really for house flippers, tip number 1 is do the work correctly. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't come back on you later. You do have some legal liability there. So do it right. Number 2 is be patient with what you buy. We're even these days getting professional flippers coming in from other towns. I get probably half dozen calls a month from people from other states and cities and whatnot saying, I want to start flipping houses in Greenville. Well, this is a horrible market to do that because houses are appreciating. There aren't too many great deals out there. So you have to be extremely patient and maybe use word of mouth to buy something that doesn't hit the market. So I think, tip number 2 for a home flipper is definitely be patient. Don't buy something where the numbers don't make sense.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Number 3, of course, is get a home inspection, get a termite inspection. do your homework on that house before you plop down any of your hard-earned money. Because I've seen some crazy things happen where people literally they thought, hey, I'll just flip a house and I'll make all this money. They do it on TV all the time. And the next thing you know, they're in bankruptcy, or they've got some financial hardship. So just be very careful if you're out there doing it.
Which if you go down the flipping route, in tangent to it, some people take which I mentioned this to you at some point, the Burr method, buy, rehab, rent, and refinance.
Absolutely.
Or going into it just like buying something. Do you have anything to say to the people who would look to buy properties to start renting them out? Because I've seen some friends interested and other friends actually do it, and I feel like they get themselves in a pickle with how much money it actually costs to fix up something, and then they have to charge the highest rent they can find.
Yeah, if you're going to be, the first part of that is rent and hold for a while.
A Warren Buffett style.
Sure, absolutely. So I think the first piece of advice there is, there's no shame in buying something for market value as long as the metrics work out on your rental. For instance, these days it's easier than ever because where interest rates are, and of course the limited number of available rentals here. So a house here, for instance, I was looking at one the other day for a client, and I think the mortgage would have been about $1,000 a month. But I think that the rental rate would probably be anywhere from $1,500 to $1,750.
Whoa.
So that's great.
Yeah.
It's in a nice area of town. Needed a little bit of work, but not much. Had great bones. Maybe refresh the paint, do a few things. But, if you're going to rent and hold for a while, you don't necessarily have to buy something at an amazing price that might need a lot of work. Buy something in good shape. Double check, triple check your rental rates, and if the numbers make sense, do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have anything else to add?
I don't. Just appreciate you having me out. Hadn't seen you in a while, so it's always good to do that and see what you're up to.
Yeah. Well, hey, feel free to plug your company right now if you would like.
Oh, my company, Reliable Home Advisors. I'm a one-man real estate brokerage here in Greenville, South Carolina, and love what I do and my clients, and working with smart people. So it's been great working with you several times, and hope to do so again in the future.
Yeah, well, we've appreciated you, Chris. You've been very helpful in our adventure, buying, selling multiple times, and highly recommend him and the people he works with. And of course, a good agent, I think, will also provide you with good contacts for contractors and various other things, which you have done. It's been great.
Certainly try to. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah. So, hey, if you're watching or listening, please like, subscribe, comment. It always helps with the YouTube algorithm and on podcast apps. And I will see you guys next time.